Welcome to Wisdom into Our Ministries. Another week trying to catch up with all of the studies that I'm trying to do and some of the subjects that I'm trying to understand about the Bible. It's incredible when you begin to research the Bible from its cultural background, and then one simple part of a verse really teaches you how to understand Scripture and the message behind the message, like I call it. Please do not forget to subscribe to this page, share and like, and let others know about what we're doing here. The whole idea is to share the Bible, study, and show ourselves approved, and trying to present information so that we're able to, when we read the text, trying to find out what it says, to whom it said it to, in what context. I think the problem is today, many people use verses and they're trying to apply their own understanding to it. And I think that that's part of exegesis, trying to understand the text. But one of the things that I've learned is that if we never consider the audience that it was spoken to, and the reasons for, and the time frame when the letter was written to, and by whom it was written, and where it was written, in what context the letter was written, then I think we're going to really use those letters that were not addressed to us, and we're going to give it a different interpretation. By the way, before I continue, I want to make a personal note here that I think is important. I am Wisdom into Our Ministries, Sabiduría en la Torah, Spanish Ministry, Teshuvah.tv, Spanish Ministry. I want to make known that our ministry and myself, I do not give any permission whatsoever. No one has the permission unless they ask to use my videos or my pictures for videos that is about conflict debates and stuff. If you really have a problem with something I teach, feel free to reach out. We can dialogue about it and have a conversation. But taking something without permission, I don't think is ethical. I really believe that we can still present our case and present the evidence, doing it in a manner that reflects our relationship with God and the respect for each other as brothers in Messiah. And I believe that if you have something against what I teach or you don't agree with me, I think you're entitled to that. And you're also entitled to present your information so you, the audience, will be able to wait out what the Bible says in context and not a perceived competition about who knows more than the other person. Remember, we're servants of God and we're trying to learn as we go. And I've always said that I want to validate what I believe. And also, don't believe what I say just because I say, go back and look it up. So it's important that we maintain a level of ethics in ministry. So even in disagreements, we may still be able to meet together and break bread as brothers and sisters, even in certain disagreements, which is okay to have in certain times. But let's maintain the integrity and the ethics in ministry. So if you have something that you want to say to me at a personal level, reach out. I love to get to know you and exchange a little bit with respect. Okay, I just wanted to say that because unfortunately, things happen in which people want to make a point about what they believe and the way they go about it. Sometimes it just doesn't reflect the type of behavior that we as believers in Messiah and brothers and sisters should do in a public arena. So I'm working on that too. I want to make sure that we do what is right so we can bring honor to the Creator. So let's move on to the teaching. I'm going to focus on the book of Revelation, chapter 14, okay? Because it is important that we consider looking into what the book of Revelation is really talking about. Now, I know that I'm presenting it from its cultural background, not necessarily from its eschatological perspective and how it would apply today. As you know, and as you heard me say before, it is important that we consider it's cyclical. Eschatology is cyclical. I believe blueprints and motifs and concepts continue to happen throughout history. I think what we need to remember is, when is the time? When can we say, I think now is the time to pinpoint something biblical to us end times? And I'm not that smart, so I stay away from it. Now, I have opinions. I'm of the opinion that if the Iranians throw a bomb on the Temple Mount and destroy the Dome of the Rock, that to me, in my opinion, that will be a pivotal point in the beginning of the end of days, because that will challenge the Muslim world to react to that, not only a favor or against Iranians, but also what is Israel going to do with the opportunity not to have the dome there. Anyway, that's another conversation. But we have to be understanding what the context was in the book of Revelation. Now, remember that the book of Revelation is written in a way that is distinct from some of the other books in the New Testament. Okay? So when you look at the Bible, you have to consider the literary genre. You know, what time frame. Also, remember that this book was written 30 years, approximately 30 years after the destruction of the temple. So when I went to Turkey, right, I was there in Turkey recording for the series that you can get on YouTube, on this YouTube channel. Go to the playlist and look for the teachings on the New Testament, and I think you will enjoy it because I was there in some of the churches of Revelation. I was able to understand that the seven churches, they lived like an apostle route. Okay, and then what's interesting is that as you go in an apostle route, those they got the letters. Patmos is maybe about 2 hours outside of Ephesus on one of the islands, even less, I think. And what sometimes we fail to understand is the chaos that was happening during the time of John, 30 years after the destruction of the temple, during the time of Domitian the emperor, and the persecution. When I went to Ephesus and I went to Smyrna and I went to, not Smyrna, we drove by, but when we went to Magnesia and there was not much there, we went to Laodicea and we went to the other churches. You know, I was able to understand that the writer, John, was actually speaking in every one of the churches with problems and issues they had in each congregation in those locations. But they were all under the same government type structure, worship models, and all the persecution was affecting them equally. So when I was there, I was able to really figure it out that wow, this is a real serious situation. That if you're not aware of the culture in the first century, how they lived, what they worship, and you got to remember the letter to the book of, in the book of the Revelation was written to seven churches in Turkey. It was not written to churches in Greece or in Rome or in Judea. Okay, so it's written to the seven churches in Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey. It's not even written to churches on the east side of Asia Minor of Galatia or Pontus or any of those places. It was written to particular congregations in certain geographical locations. How we looked at every single one of those locations, studied honor and shame, governmental structure, trade guilds, reciprocity and patronage, and everything that they lived under, imperial cult, temple worship, you know, how that influences the context of the letter. And that's really what we're trying to do here, trying to understand it a little bit more. So I want to say hello to every single one of you that are here this afternoon. Thank you for joining me. And I pray that this teaching is actually a blessing to you. Remember, the whole idea is to present certain concepts and principles in its cultural background. So when we read it, we are understanding the message behind the message, behind the narrative. And I think it's extremely important that we consider that. Let me give you an example of what I mean. When you read Revelation chapter 14, verse 8, it uses this expression, the wine of her immoral passion. That's the Greek text right here. And it uses very interesting words in the Greek. As we continue to move forward on this, I want to give you a roadmap of the study. Okay, I'm going to guide you through these 5 steps. Greek phrase. We're going to look into the lexical analysis of the key terms from a BDAG and all the sources that are credible and academic. Jewish prophetic background. Wine and prostitution imagery in Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the book of Nahum. Roman imperial context, Babylon as Rome, imperial cult and economic seduction. Social science interpretation, talk about patronage, allegiance, and prostitution using Friesen and also the Silva's book on those topics. And then we're going to go into first century readers and definitions. The Greek phrase It's a lexical foundation, and I think you need to consider looking into these things. Let me read you the verse. The verse says, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She made all the nations drink the wine of her immortal passion, according to the Net Bible. The phrase also appears verbatim in Revelation 17:2, 18:3, forming a deliberate literary refrain, according to Ani in the World Bible Commentary, page 830. Now, the reason why I'm teaching on this is because as I'm going through a lot of the information that I'm reading, this verse caught my attention. Why? Because I was in Turkey and I went to Sardis. And while I was in Sardis, I was listening to one of the guides that was leading a Christian tour, and I basically tagged along so I could hear and learn more. And the guy made a comment that, to be honest, I didn't know. That's why I went, because I wanted to learn. I always wondered, why is it that only in this on the church of Sardis it talks about I'll come to you as a thief in the night? You know, hopefully I'm using the same language as the book of Revelation. And I always thought that's kind of weird because every single one of the letters have a different topic, subject matter. You know, Ephesus, they have a problem, and they're not too far from each other. I mean, from Ephesus to Laodicea is what, 2.5 hours or 2 hours drives? It's not that far from one another. So I'm thinking, so what's going on here? So as I'm tagging along this guy, he makes one comment that made me really understand, wait, I need to revisit every single one of the letters in Revelation and contrast the letter and what it's saying to the audience and the history and the topography and the geography and the everything that encompasses history of everything they've done there to understand the letter better, okay? So it happened with Sardis. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, because there is when I was able to understand this verse better. So when I was reading it for the study, that's what really caught my eye out of the whole chapter. Although I've taught about the cloud rider and now something that I'm going to do another study that I already have it prepared. And as a matter of fact, that was a teaching that I was going to do today. But I thought this will be more interesting because I wanted to share with you what I'm learning about using imagery, language in the Bible and connecting it all through the Old Testament. So when I'm in Sardis there and I'm following this group, the guide makes this comment. He goes, well, Persia and Rome were the only kingdoms that defeated Sardis because there was a weak part of the wall and both kingdoms conquered Sardis in the middle of the night because they were so secure, but they understood that. And I saw the mountain he was pointing to where the wall was. That was the weakest point of the city. And if you do, how do you call it? Tactical analysis of the city, you would have known that that was the weak point for them to enter. And actually, the times that they were conquered through the same place at night while everyone's sleeping because of the weakness of that location to provide security, which it was so hidden, they probably didn't think anybody knew except for the Persians and the Romans. So when I got to read this, I'm thinking, falling is Babylon the Great. I say, wait. So why if it's John is speaking to the Roman Empire, then how come he's saying Babylon? Because Babylon and Rome have one thing in common. They are the both kingdoms that destroy the temple. That's a very important detail. Okay. They're both kingdoms that destroy the temple. So but then that begs the question. It says, falling is Babylon, but yet the subject matter is directed to Rome, their government, their environment, their worship, their oppression, their persecution of believers. Remember, the book of Revelation was written after the destruction of the temple. All the privileges that the believers in Yeshua had, and they shared with the Jews with what is called religio licita, which is a legal religion, that already dissipated. They no longer have those benefits and exemptions that the Roman Empire gave the Jews. The Jews are afraid to lose those privileges. Thus, they turn against the believers in Yeshua. Thus, the language in the book of Revelation, the synagogue of Satan, that is applicable in certain only two of the letters of the seven. Two of the seven talks about the synagogue of Satan. Okay. And that was due to the trade guilt and also to the religio licita, the legal religions, and why the Jews had certain exemptions that Caesar gave and Augustus continued, and all the emperors gave them. Now they're losing those privileges due to the persecution of Jews after the temple was destroyed, and also because of the chaos that the believers in Yeshua were creating, not because it was not. Let me explain that better. The believers in Yeshua was creating chaos, and the Bible in the book of Acts tells us that the believers, Paul was going through all the kingdom creating problems. Why? He's presenting Yeshua as the Kyrios, as the Lord, and that was the title for the emperor. In other words, this was an anti-imperial message that Paul was preaching, and that was a threat to the well-being of the government. This is the reason why Nero, he set fire to Jerusalem and blamed the believers, because everyone knew. And this is the reason that Claudius expelled the Jews out of Rome. I mean, we need to know this history because the whole First Corinthians is written from Ephesus and is written during the time frame in the Greco-Roman world and the Roman powers, that there was a lot of friction, a lot of friction in regards to this new sect that is coming from within Jews, that is presenting Yeshua not just as the Messiah of the Jewish people, but also undermining the power of the emperor and presenting a gospel, good news. The Roman gospel versus the gospel of Yeshua. Which is better? The gospel of Yeshua, obviously, the good news that sets us free from death. That was a threat, a political threat. And I know many of us don't see the New Testament as an anti-imperial message. And I think that once you do, then you will able to contrast why the persecution and why they're after the people of the book and also the believers in Yeshua. Is this making sense to you? Okay, so now watch this. So let's continue this. Let's talk about Babylon the Great. Okay. Now, according to let's take those three words that are there that I want you to focus in. Actually, let me read the text. I wanna read the verse. Check this out. If you read in verse 6 to 8, it says, "Then I saw another flying angel directly overhead. He had an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth and every nation, tribe, language, and people. He declared a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of judgment has arrived, and worship the one who have made." I want you to notice what it says. Who have made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. A very important statement. A very important statement. Why? Because in the ancient Near East, they believed that the gods of the pantheons had dominion over the sea and the water. It was a mess in the ancient world. So when John is making this particular statement, he is saying that it is the God of Israel that has complete dominion over all creation. And by the way, in Pergamum, when I was there, I went to see an inscription of Trajan, an imperial temple that was there in honor to Trajan. When I went to the museum, I saw the original statue of Trajan, the emperor, right? Which was actually the image of the beast. The image was the statue of the emperor. Everyone who understands ancient Near Eastern principles and also Greco-Roman world and imperial worship, they know this. It was a literal image that actually were forced to worship as allegiance to the emperor. Okay, that's what is Imperial Cult. And every major city, specifically the ones in Asia Minor, they had temples honoring the emperor. That's why it's such an abomination. You don't honor the emperor of Rome. You honor God, and you thank God for his son Yeshua, who's the image of the invisible God, who gives you access to the one thing that the emperor cannot provide for you, which is life, defeating death, the ultimate gift. Okay. All right. So when I was there, I was able to notice that in the inscription, it says the Lord Kyrios, exactly the word that is used in Romans 10:9, the Lord of the sea and dry land. Exactly what it says in the chapter 13, 14, that there was an angel who put his feet on the dry land and on the sea. In the Roman Empire, that represented sovereignty and authority. That's what it meant. Guys, I want to make a statement. And this is let me actually finish this verse and I'll go make the statement. Okay? Read verse 8. A second angel followed the first. And by the way, verse 6 and 7 is reversing what is said, the three things that the beast and the false prophet said to worship the beast and give honor to. Here, John is saying, no, you worship God. You go back to the Lord. It's reversing the whole paradigm. Okay? Now, verse 8 says, and the second angel followed the first, declaring, falling is Babylon, the great city. She made all the nations drink of the wine of her immoral passion. And that caught my attention. Why? Because of the words. The words, as I studied them before, it makes sense to me, so I began to look into them. So let me share them with you. I want to make the statement before I go on. Okay. As you know, I've been studying for a long time. And I'm far from knowing everything. But understand that when I say cultural backgrounds, I'm focusing on the particular areas to understand the foundation of what we're reading. Clearly, people get the impression that if I say something about ancient Near East and I'm making a contrast how the ancient world believed, and I'm saying the Bible is using a similar language, but redirecting the attention to, instead of some gods and have no power, to the one true God, people assume that we are not honoring God, that we're saying that God copy. Hello? The people of Israel lived in a real world, surrounded by real nations. They didn't live in a vacuum. They knew that many things are contrasted because they're there to make a distinction. Even Leviticus 18 says that. Just wait until we get into the book of Leviticus. Once I am done with Revelation, I'm fully immersed in Leviticus. We got a lot of teachings I want to share with you about Leviticus. And then my life has completely changed because I finally look at this and going like, wait a minute. We are so dogmatic about something that we interpret in the 21st century that we forget jurisdiction, we forget context, we forget historical backgrounds, geographical, literary genres. We are trying to follow this God of Israel without really understanding the people of the book, where they live and how they live. And we have to take the time and chill out a little bit, because when you hear something that doesn't sound familiar to you, people react instead of responding. Grant me the opportunity to present my case. No one's minimizing Yeshua. No one's minimizing the Bible. No one is minimizing the gospel. We are trying to understand the audience in that text that you're reading. Surely they didn't dress like you. They didn't speak your language. They didn't share your culture. We are grafted into this culture. We owe it to God to try to understand the context of his words, how they were given and to whom it was given and where it was given. Does that make sense to you guys? Just a little bit of a concern that I got, because every time we present something that doesn't sound true to you, because we're still trying to sift our way from Christianity and the way we learn things in Christianity, I'm trying to understand scholarly application and research they've done so that we can apply, so we can understand the text better and live according to the Bible. But it requires a level of grace and a level of understanding to grant the teachers that you've given the opportunity to establish a foundation. So then you'll be able to understand the whole thing. I want you to consider this. If I present something to you and you know me for a long time, and all of a sudden it sounds weird to you, instead of saying Rico is wrong and he don't know what he's talking about, consider saying this. Wow, I never heard him say that before. That's out of place for me. I never heard him say it. I wonder what research has he done to understand that today? And then you ask, and then we can share. And then maybe I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I change it. But if I'm right in my thesis, then now we can both study it together and we can both grow together. And that's the whole foundation. Now that I said that, let's move on. Okay, I just want to make sure. I thought that was important, because many times people have concerns. Oh, Rico, you are minimizing the Bible. Why? Because I want to understand the context. Listen, if you go live in my country, like I was born in Puerto Rico, and if you go live in my country and you don't take the time to know the culture, the language, even what the geography is, you're going to jump on the plane going to a place you've never seen. You would be out of your mind. You have to know at least where it's located on the map. But we read the Bible, we never even care who these people were, where they lived, what was their culture. And that's why we have 49,000 denominations. Okay, let's continue on the topic at hand here, guys. Thank you for your time. I'm really having a good time. Let's go here real quickly. Now let's read these words on the text. The word for vine, for wine, eunos. El bidag, fermented grape drink. Now, did you know that in the Greco-Roman world, and I have the information and I don't know where it is now, one of my students found it for me. I actually did a whole teaching on it. It's about wine. Did you know that Asia Minor, at one point, they actually produced the best wines in the world during the time of the Roman Empire? And one of the emperors of Rome actually gave an order to burn all the vineyards because it was competing with the wine of Rome. And I'm going to present that. I actually have a PowerPoint on that. You'll find it really interesting. And the whole PowerPoint is based on this information. By the way, when I was in Turkey and we went from Ephesus driving to Laodicea, when we were going driving, we saw a lot of vineyards. But when we went from Laodicea, started going northwest to Hierapolis, then to Philadelphia. And when we started driving from Philadelphia, the Church of Philadelphia, all the way to Pergamum, okay, there were like miles and miles and miles of vineyards. Okay, I had the wine is not as good, but they have miles of vineyards. I mean, miles. I remember going about an hour and there was nothing but vineyards on both sides. So we have a physical testimony that what is using, they would have known about wine and what it meant. So that's one thing. So let's continue here. Got to hurry up. I got to go teach in Spanish after this. All right. Says themos means passion or fury. According to the BDAG, page 461, intense emotional state, wrath, rage, burning desire. Coaster has a great commentary on this, by the way. Notes the ambiguity is deliberate. Rome's passion. Now, remember, the writer is using these terms to address a system of government. Okay? Now, when it gets to the word immorality, when we read the text in a Western mindset, we are thinking physical immorality, which is still part of the definition, obviously. But I submit to you that the way that is using it here in the book of Revelation 14 is more of the influence of Rome in a decay morale style of lifestyle. Okay, so in the BDAG, you talk about in Jewish prophetic usage, it denotes covenantal infidelity and idolatry, not merely literal prostitution, according to Oni and the World Bible Commentary, 52C, page 911. So what I'm trying to submit to you today is that the way that this is used here is not in the context of immorality, physical immorality only, is mainly painting the picture of the influence of the Roman Empire as a government profaning all the kingdoms of that known world back in the day. Today, can we say that that could be applicable to another kingdom? Well, yes. America will fall under something like that because America has influenced a lot of the America with their movies, with their music, with all kinds of things that has actually introduced things that are not part of the cultures of those countries. So therefore, every system, the Spaniards did it at one point. The British did it at one point. Every great kingdom have done that at one point or another. And by the way, when Messiah returns, and the kingdom of God is restored again with the authority of Yeshua as our future king, then obviously righteousness and justice will be the norm on the earth, and the influence of God's kingdom rule on the earth through Yeshua the Messiah will bring us the proper influence what the nations should do. Kingdoms of righteousness and justice, not to defile them, but to improve on their way of life of the gospel. That's exactly more or less what it means. So we're going to look at this in the sense of immorality, porneia, as idolatry. And I'm going to connect that with the Old Testament, okay? Now let's move on. So Jewish prophetic background. Let's talk about what the background of the wine imagery is in the Old Testament. It says, give me a second. All right. Hebrew prophetic background, wine, prostitution, and empire in the Hebrew prophets. Okay. Babylon was a golden cup. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand and made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, and that is why the nations are mad. This is a JPS Tanakh in Jeremiah 51:7. So why is John utilizing the language of Isaiah to talk about the Romans? And by the way, First Peter, and First Peter, Peter talks about Rome as Babylon, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So in the Hebrew context of this is Kosahav Babel Vayad, a golden cup Babylon in the hands of the Lord. Intoxicating equals moral collapse. Nations go mad. Okay, they lose the capacity for moral reasoning under imperial ideology. Guys, we can see a perfect example of that with Iranians, with the Iran government, not the people, with the government. They're crazy. It's a death cult. Okay. And by the way, they'll kill a lot of people with them when they're getting ready to disappear completely. They'll do something to kill their own people because they don't care about life. To them, death is victory. You got to remember that. Okay. And yes, I'm going to Israel in November. Sign up. That war will be over soon. Let's sign up. Come to me, come to Israel. Let me show you the land of Israel to show you a lot of this stuff. I think you'll be blessed. So sign up. wisdomandtorahevent.com. Check it out. All right. John's allusion. Revelation 14:8 directly echoes Jeremiah 51, verse 7. Jeremiah 51:7. John's Babylon inherits the full symbolic weight of the Jeremiah oracle, according to Osborne in Revelation commentary that he has. Then in Isaiah 23, verse 17, is using the same language. After 70 years, the Lord will take up Tyre's case, and she shall return to her hire, and shall go whoring with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. So it's using the same language, and she shall prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the earth. Tyre, like Rome, accumulated wealth through maritime trade and political alliance. Isaiah's framed this economic power as sana, which is to prostitute. Okay? So a loaded covenant infidelity term, according to Oswald in his commentary in the NICOT, page 439. I'm giving you all the references because I had made a decision that this year I'm going to present to you my best, to the best of my ability, as much scholarly work in the information that I'm presenting to you, which I always do, but I want you to know where everything is. I think it's imperative that now today, with the whole thing going around us, within the movement and the people watching us, that we set a standard that we don't have to be right 100% in everything, but we will do our best to validate and verify all the things that we teach. Now, remember, if the information is correct, then we deal with the interpretation. That's eisegesis, not exegesis. So we care about making sure that the exegesis of the text is done correctly. And that's what I'm trying to do. So please know that I'm presenting all my PowerPoints to the best of my ability in the format that is more academic, so that we can validate our points in the information. If I give them an opinion that you don't agree with, it's fine, but make sure that you validate the information that is presented. Okay? All right, perfect. It's good for accountability. It helps everybody. All right, so let's go here. So let's talk about, because of the countless harlotries, which is actually Nahum, the book of Nahum, chapter 3, verse 4, says, because of the countless harlotries of the harlot, the beautiful and bewitched mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and clans through her sorceries. Now, what's interesting is the harlotries of the harlot. Nahum applies the prostitution metaphor to Nineveh, the seduction of nations through military and economic domination. John applies the same template to Rome, according to Beale in his commentary of the book of Revelation, which in my opinion is one of the best in the academic world. So Nahum applies the prostitution metaphor to Nineveh based on the economic domination and military efforts. Across Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Nahum, the dual imagery of wine, intoxication, loss of judgment, and prostitution, which in this case is used as covenantal betrayal and idolatrous alliances, functions as a unified prophetic critique of empires. Revelation inherits and intensifies this entire tradition, according to Coaster in Anchor Yo Bible Commentary in page 610. It talks about this. So, Rome as Babylon, the imperial city and first century apocalyptic imagination. We have to remember that the book of Revelation was written in a real time frame under a great empire that is really reacting to the destruction of the temple and the persecution of believers who are teaching an anti-imperial message. In the eyes of the Romans, the believers of Yeshua they are accused of sedition, causing communities to go into treason. Let me give you an example of this. Hopefully, I'll be able to find it right away. In the book of Acts, chapter 17. And I understood this a lot better when I went to Thessalonica, which is the seat of to the letter of Thessalonians. Okay, Thessaloniki, and I think it's verse 17. I'm trying to remember, so just I'm in John. It will not work. If you go to the book of Acts, I think it's 17 or 16, if I remember correctly. It talks about when Paul goes. There we go. The uproar in Thessalonica. After Paul and Silas passed through Amphipolis, which is about 2.5 hours east of Thessaloniki, and Apollonia, which is modern day Kabbalah, in the northeast of northern Greece, near Turkey, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue, and Paul went in. And as was his custom, by the way, I went to the Jewish Museum. My family and I, we went to the Jewish Museum of Thessaloniki. That's what the name of it today, Thessalonica. And my son, we were not allowed to film or take pictures. It was kind of weird. But my son saw an inscription that actually was telling you where the ancient synagogue was located that they themselves believe Paul went to. And that was the oldest synagogue that was there during the time of the first century. And we were able to go to the corner. If you go to the playlist and you look for the list of the Greco-Roman period on, Asia Minor and Rome and Greece that I did, I'll teach from there. It's really amazing. It's right next to the water, exactly like Josephus says. All the synagogues were located next to bodies of water, either the sea or lakes or rivers. Okay, which explains, by the way, Philippi, because Paul went to the river because he thought people were praying. Why would he say that? There was no synagogue there, but he went to the water, to the river, because the Jews had a custom. They normally placed their synagogues near bodies of water. Josephus talks about this, and I was able to see it with my own eyes. All right, let's continue here. So it says, verse 3. It says, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and rise from the dead, saying, this is the Messiah, Yeshua, who I'm proclaiming to you. Some of them were persuaded. This is in the synagogue. Some of them were persuaded. And I remind you that Paul didn't have the New Testament when he said this. He was only teaching from the Torah and the prophets. I wonder if we can do the same. Go to a synagogue and show the Messiah from the Torah and the prophets. Just think about that. It says, some of them were persuaded to join Paul and Silas, as did great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews became jealous with the help of some of the ruffians. Watch this. And with the help of some of the ruffians, just the regular people, in the marketplaces, they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. While they were searching for Paul and Silas to bring them out to assembly, they attacked Jason's house. When they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some brothers and sisters before the city authorities, shouting. Now, watch what it says. This is the people, not the Jews. The Jews were smart in this sense because they knew that according to Torah law, the Romans would not give them any court hearings. That's one of the exemptions of the Romans to the Jews. They could rule their communities according to their law. You see that in the story of Gallio in Corinth when they took Paul to the Bema. Now, I want you to notice what it says. The Jews recruit from the marketplace people who are not Jewish. They make the accusation. Pay attention to what it says. It says, these people have been turning the world upside down and have come here also. And Jason has entertained them and as guests. They are all acting contrary to the decrees of the emperor, saying that there is another king named Jesus. The people and the city officials were disturbed when they heard this. And after they have taken bail from Jason and the others, they let them go. So why was this such a big deal? Because each imperial town took an oath of allegiance. They all took an oath of allegiance. I've taught on this before. If you go to my teaching on YouTube about the Jewish privileges in the Greco-Roman world, I talk about it there. So here you can see the example of allegiance to the emperor in all of these cities. And the reason, because they were proclaiming Yeshua as Kyrios, Lord. Any Roman or Greek or someone living in Asia Minor, they would have known when you say Yeshua as your Lord, your Kyrios, now you are making an affront to the authority of the emperor. It's only to us, we don't understand it because we are removed from that environment. But when you go to these places, you clearly see it. So Rome as Babylon, the imperial city in the first century apocalyptic imagination. Let's talk about this. What is the scholarly consensus in regards to this? What is the scholarly consensus? Okay. It says Babylon equals Rome. Coaster, and we're talking about writers now, he says Babylon is the code name for Rome, recognized to any reader in Roman world. Okay. Oni also says the use of Babylon for Rome is attested in Jewish sources contemporary with Revelation. And Friesen, Rome fits all criteria: imperial cult, trade dominance, and persecution of dissidents in imperial cult and the apocalypse of John. Guys, if there's a book that I recommend, is that one right there. I recommend that book, Imperial Cults and Apocalypse of John. It's a really good book. It gives you a lot of primary sources in regards to what's going on. So a corroboration of Jewish sources. In 4th Ezra, chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, and verse 28 and 31, 2nd Baruch, chapter 10, verse 1 and 3, both use Babylon for Rome after 70 AD. Did you know that those books were written after the destruction of the temple, somewhere at the end and the beginning of the second century? At the beginning of the first century and at the beginning of the second century. I'm sorry, at the end of the first century and at the beginning of the second century. Many people don't know that 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch were written after the destruction of the temple. Okay. Now, 1 Peter chapter 5. Listen to what it says. Verse 13. She was in Babylon, chosen together with you, send you greetings. This is widely understood as Rome. Now, when you go to the text, it's 1 Peter chapter 5. Let me read it here. How many of you did not even catch on before until today that 1 Peter chapter 5 is alluding to Rome as Babylon? I'd like to see the comments if you help me out. Yes or no. Give me a 1 if you say yes, and a 2 if you think no. Okay? But when you go in, remember who he wrote to. Peter was writing to the same audience of the book of Revelation in Asia Minor. Not necessarily directly to the 7 churches, but watch. I'm going to read the first 2 verses. 1 Peter, is written to the exiles in Asia Minor, the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Guys, every single one of those places is Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. Now, in chapter 5, verse 13, I'm going to read from verse 12, which is actually the end, the final benediction. It said, through Silvanus, whom I consider a faithful brother, I have written this short letter to encourage you and to testify that this is the true grace of God. Stand fast in it. Your church sister in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greeting, and does my son Mark. Greetings, one another, kiss of love, peace. He's not in Babylon. He's actually talking about Rome. So therefore, we need to consider that there's so many things in language what we're not aware of that sometimes creates some discrepancies in our understanding of the Bible. I hope you agree with that. Let me read you the history about the text that I told you about. The corroborating Jewish sources. This is a post 70 AD, CE, Common Era. It's apocalyptic writings, right? So, fourth Ezra, chapter 3, verse 28 and 31. But if the people are not better than the other nations, then why has my womb borne children? Or if the world has forgotten you, why does it have Babylon as the mistress and not Zion? You got to know when this was written, in the year 90 to 100 of the Common Era, after the destruction of the temple. So Babylon clearly functions as a symbolic placeholder for Rome, lamenting its dominance over the suffering Zion, because the temple was destroyed and the Jews were persecuted out of Israel. Second Baruch 10:3 says, for if the builder made the tower, yet it was not he who supplied the bricks, nor did he supply the cement, but it is that Babylon whose judgment is just and whose power is mighty, which you yourself subjected. This passage addresses the destruction of Jerusalem, explicitly attributed to Babylon, identifying Rome as the instrument of divine judgment, because Rome and Babylon, they had the one thing in common. They destroyed the temple. So this was written around the year 100 to 150 Common Era, after a long time after the destruction of the temple. Let's talk about the cities in Asia Minor, including Ephesus, Pergamum, Smyrna. They competed, and this is very important. They competed for a title. They competed vigorously to host imperial temples, neocortal status. Now, you know that you see that in the Bible. I want to go to the text. Give me 1 second. I want to do something. I'm going to show you that word neokoros in the book of Acts, and then you'll see what I mean. Oops. There we go. Give me a second. I'm trying to do everything here at the same time. For some reason, I'm not having much success with something. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. So let me go to the book of Acts, chapter, I'll try to remember. I think it's 19, when they're in Ephesus. Yeah, they're in Ephesus. If you go to the latter verses in verse 36 or 39, oh, we go, 27. There are actually in the stadium, and they're actually talking about the great Artemis, which is whom all the provinces of Asia and the world worship, and will suffer loss over her greatness. Now, let's keep moving forward. I want to get to this verses. Verse 35. After the city secretary quieted the crowd, he said, men of Ephesus, what person is there who does not know the city of the Ephesians, the keeper of the temple of the great Artemis? Now, that word keeper here, if you go to the bottom right here, is neokoros. Now, if I open it down, this is, it's in the Hebrew. It should be in the Greek. I don't know why it gave me the Hebrew. We go back to it again. It's neokoros. Man. Struggling with this thing here. Here we go. So if I go to the word keeper, it's neokoros. I'm going to find it in English for you because I already did the teaching on this. So I want to make sure. Neokoros. There we go. It says, in the BDAG, neokoros, the city is described as a warden of guardian of the goddess and her temple. It was probably the most prestigious title you can give a city in the first century. If you received that title, there we go, right here. Neokoros. What is the word neokoros? And this is the picture that I took in the Museum of Ephesus. Neokoros was an honor conferred upon a city whereupon the city was permitted to construct a temple to the emperor. The city became the guardian of the imperial temple. The cities throughout the Mediterranean were competed. The world competed for this honor. Mark Fairchild, in the book Christian Origins of Ephesus and Asia Minor, talks about this. Neokoros is actually a temple keeper. Now, I need you to understand one thing, that in the ancient world, every single one of the cities of Revelation at one point or another, they were keepers of the temple. So this is the most prestigious title that a community could have, because uh, it represented the status under the Roman Empire and the allegiance with the Roman Empire. Okay. So this is going on in the backdrop of all the things happening in the book of Revelation. Ephesus was Neocortos. Laodicea later on became Neocortos. Pergamum and Ephesus always had a battle between one or the other. They're always competing for this title. Ephesus was the first one, which gave huge prestige and power in Asia Minor. Okay, so understand that this is really paramount to know, okay, as we study the book of Revelation, because what comes with it is what really the book of Revelation talks about: not to be able to buy or sell or to worship the image of the beast. The beast is actually the whole Roman Empire in this case, and the image is the image of the emperor who leads the Roman Empire. So therefore, guys, to them in that time frame, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again in the future. What I am saying, that in the audience of the first century book of Revelation, it was clear and obvious to them who the image of the beast was, and who was the beast, and who was the false prophet, and all this stuff was simple to them. They lived in the middle of it. They knew this language. We, in turn, we are removed from it 2,000 years. Well, we do, however, the same principles of power, and that's why the the book of Revelation, John is alluding to Babylon, because the same structure of an empire and the influences of an empire over all the nations have been consistent throughout millennia. The Egyptians had massive influence in the ancient world. The Hittites, when they were in power, then also the Mesopotamians when they were, the Assyrians when they were in power, the Babylonians when they were in power, the Greeks, and also now what do you call it? The Romans, and then later on the Byzantine period, and then the Ottoman Empire, and then all of a sudden now all the United States with all this, control over the world, and eventually one will come up that will become the ultimate oppressor. So it keeps repeating itself. We just have to see what it meant back then to identify them today. Does that make sense? If you want to talk about prophecy, I recommend you get to know the ancient world. Because you tell me, come out of my people, oh Babylon. Okay, so why do I need to come out of Babylon? We live in the United States. Why is that language still being used today? Ask the person, come out of my people, oh Babylon. But wait, I don't live in Babylon. I live in the United States of America. And then let them explain to you why they are connecting United States with Babylon. And then why there's a problem that John is doing the same thing to the Romans. Because it's a system and an order of control, persecution, and also oppression that is developed through major empires around the world. That has always been consistent. That is the motif and the theme that is consistent throughout the Bible. Everything keeps repeating itself. Okay? Back then, you have the mark of the beast. What was the mark of the beast? Well, loyalty to the emperor. You have to worship the emperor. And then what was it that did not allow you to buy or sell? Well, you have to become part of the trade guilds. If you were not part of a trade guild, by the way, I remind you, the Jews were exempt from them because they were a legal religion. And that's why Jewish people have always been entrepreneurs all throughout their history, because it forced them to make their own money and their businesses so they wouldn't have to be part of a worshiping of other gods. That was a requirement under certain trade guilds. And this is the reason why Paul always worked on his own. He didn't even accept money from other people in the beginning. Only when the congregation was established, they all became benefactors. That's another conversation as we know it. So let's continue here. I'm getting off the subject. So cities of Asia Minor, including Ephesus, Pergamum, and Smyrna, competed vigorously to host imperial temples. Neocortal status. Very important one. Okay. Participation in imperial cult festivals was both a civic duty, important, and economic necessity. Revelation's 7 letters address communities embedded in precisely this cultural type of environment, according to Friesen. Okay. Now, have you ever wondered why Paul says all is permissible, but not everything? I keep forgetting not to do that in English. You know that in Corinth, I don't know if you knew this, but in Corinth, if you're a Roman citizen, you had the right, actually in the whole empire, but specifically Corinth, because when I went to Corinth, we saw the evidence and the archaeological evidence. They found over like 20 cafeterias adjacent to temples. And the cafeterias were necessary because they used to have extra meat. And there was they used to have like cult festivals all the time, like the Ishmael Games, about 15 minutes northeast of Corinth. And basically what they will do, they do games, and they used to do imperial worship, and they used to sacrifice meat to idols. And then the people of status, like Roman citizen, could go and eat of the meat sacrificed to idols. All things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. Hey, Teresa, I didn't cover about the detail you gave me, which you were right, in regards to the 12,000, 144,000. I want to leave that for something else, because that was really good tip you gave me in regards to as an army type language. And that was really cool. But I didn't want to present it today because I want to expand a little bit more and learn more before I continue. Okay. But I want to thank you publicly for that tip you gave me. It was very, very good. And I understood it better because you helped me out with it. So I want to thank you for that. All right. So let's continue here, guys. So let's talk about the wine ideological intoxication in Rome. Wine, it gives wine, right? Through wealth. Remember, we're using the imagery of this, okay? It says, Rome gives wine through wealth, trade networks, cultural prestige, and political benefits. Nations become dependent, losing moral clarity and adapting Roman values. That's what happened in the Hellenization period. Now, the word pornea, which is like immorality, but in this context is using it here, I submit to you, is more so in the context of idolatrous allegiance, turning away from God. It says worship of the emperor, participation in imperial festivals, and economic integration with cult systems constitute the pornea in Revelation, the Revelation condemns. According to the BDAG, confirms the covenant betrayal sense dominant in Jewish usage. So in the Torah, in the prophets, prostitution is also connected not only with the physical act, but also with the national behavior of disobedience and idolatry, and the sin of idolatry and rebellion against God. Now, the nations equal here in this verse global complicity. The ethne, which is nations and peoples that it talks about in Revelation 14, are not passive victims, but willing participants who receive tangible benefits from Roman Empire participations. Ani and WBC, the World Bible Commentary, talks about this. By the way, remember when Trump came into power and then Rubio began to examine USAID, that whole organization that was giving money to everyone? That organization actually reminds me of this, because that was the way that America can influx other nations by giving them money to impose the values of the government at that moment upon that nation. That's why if you pay attention to all the craziness they were giving money to enhance certain countries for different reasons, to enhance gay rights in particular countries that do not support that. So that's a different. That's the same example of what we see here. Okay. For example, in Israel, building a stadium. I'm talking about in biblical times, a stadium, or building gymnasiums inside the city of Jerusalem, Roman bath and things like that, was a way to influence the values of the Greco-Roman world into the Torah-based community in Jerusalem. And that's why Bethesda, the pool of Bethesda, right? One of the miracles that occurred there, right? And by the way, that miracle occurred before the pool of Bethesda became part of the city. During the time of Agrippa II, After Yeshua died and resurrected, the city was enlarged northward, and the pool of Bethesda now became part of the city on the time of Agrippa II. During the time of Yeshua, the pool of Bethesda was outside the city limits, the walls of Jerusalem. The pool of Shiloah in the south, by the city of David, that was inside the city walls. And you see two contrasting miracles, one outside and one inside. That's another teaching I think you consider looking into. All right, guys. So let's move on. So we're going here. We have to understand the language. It says, with her kings, the earth committed sexual immorality, and those who lived on the earth got drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. Again, that is repeated in Revelation 17 too. You see the same thing. Revelation 17 is repeating the same language as Revelation 14:8, and then again Revelation 18:3. Transliteration, we see aorist passive, and it talks about to make drunk, the influence, a deceptive influence that is happening by the Roman world to the people. Let's talk about economic seduction. Revelation 18 talks about this. Commerce of the empire. That's one way that they entice the people to move away from Messiah, okay, because of their needs. They had lack of needs. Guys, we went through a process. It's called COVID. During the time of COVID, which in my opinion was a setup, they were trying to do a complete reset. We could have seen, if it would have been successful, we could have seen total control of the world. Because basically, if you didn't take the shot at that time, you could not buy or sell or work or do anything. Many people lost their jobs. Worse, many people lost their lives because they took the shot at a pressure because they need to survive. They need to take care of their families. And they instill fear in people in order for you to feel pressure to do something you didn't want to do. And because of that, people unfortunately lost their lives. They should be held accountable for that. So therefore, we were starting to see some of these principles and how they are trying to take over the world. These things will be repeated again, but not exactly the way that it was done in the first century, guys. The system of control is the same. The mechanism is different. I want to repeat that again. The system of control is the same. The mechanism is different. If you recognize the motif and the principles originally, you will be able to identify if it lines up with the motif that has been outlined for us in the Bible. Hope that makes sense. Okay? Right now, humanity is in the way of progress, according to many people. That's why they're developing intelligence, artificial intelligence. And they're developing robots to do the job of humans. Because, many people, humanity is basically dying out. They are trying to do away with God's creation and create their own, guys. This is the ultimate challenge to God's authority on the earth. God prescribed the earth to be the domain of his creation, in his cosmos, in his order, not the order of humanity. Humanity's authority is not over creation. Is to rule the creation that God gave him the power to do so, not to create, but to rule over it, because that's the God ordained role that he gave humanity. But that they're gone farther than that. They want to go to Mars, where we are not commanded to go live. That's why there's no atmosphere, and that's why there's no way to eat. There's no way, nothing. So what is this guy doing? He's preparing all kinds of cars that are electric, all kinds of robots. Basically, they're going to be sending robots to Mars to prepare the way to see if people can live in there. I mean, this is about supplanting God's creation for something man-made. It's exactly what happened in the story of Babel. It's exactly what's happened throughout humanity. Now we don't want the children to be born naturally, the way God prescribed it. Now we want to create humans out of something outside the model that God established. This is the ultimate betrayal to God's cosmic order, the way he established the cosmos. And we will be able to identify those things. Now, Revelation 18:3 talks about the same thing. It says, "For all the nations have drunk the wine of her passionate immorality. For the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and the merchant of the earth have gone rich from the power of her sexual behavior." Okay, the same language, right? Sorry. Let me go back to this one again. I apologize. All right. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 12 to verse 13, I want you to get this. This is important. I have a little bit of a graph here. But in Revelation 13, verse 12 and 13, please go back and read it. I'll be talking more about this when I get to chapter 18. But it says, a list imports commodities like gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, citron wood, ivory goods, costly wood, bronze, iron and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine wheat flour, all that stuff. Now, Beeld, in his commentary on the book of Revelation, he notes the list mirrors known Roman trade catalogs and imperial luxury consumptions. And what we see here is that it mentions 6 different types of precious metals, 5 different types of luxury textiles. It mentions here 5 different spices and incense, 4 different types of foods and drink, animals and transport, and then 1 type of human trafficking, which is slavery and human lives. By the way, Ephesus was the hub of a slavery, selling slaves around the world and the ancient world at that time. Now, when you read about excessive luxury and wantonness, the word strenos appears in the Greek text, and the BDAC basically defines it as excessive luxury, wantonness. Appears only here in the New Testament, so the only time that it appears in that chapter 18. The cognate verb in Revelation 18:7 and 9 means to live in a sensual luxury. Osborne observes that this term specifically evokes Romans' notorious reputation for extravagant consumption and decadent banqueting culture, a key propaganda target in both Jewish apocalyptic and Roman Stoic critique. This is important, and I want to share a little bit more on this. What do the historians say about this? It says, Tacitus in the Annals, his book on the history says, describe how the provinces were corrupted by Roman luxury flowing outward through trade and military presence. Guys, I can testify to this. When I went to Ephesus the first time, we walked through the main road and we saw there was so much to see. I didn't really have time to appreciate everything. When I came home, I started reviewing a lot of the information from Ephesus, and I realized that I actually missed 50% of the information. So I went back. I went back last year around this time. And this time we went to, there's a little slope in the main street here. It's called Cortes Road, the main road. And there's a little embankment here, like a mountain. And that's where the rich people live. So we actually paid to go up there, and we went through all the ancient mansions that were there in the 1st century. When Paul went there, he would have seen them. Guys, one of them was like 4,000 square feet, and they were huge. They had a cold room, okay? And they had a sauna. They had bath. They had places to welcome people to do exactly these type of banquets. I mean, they look like $1 million home today. And you can really see how they lived. They had indoor plumbing. I mean, to have an indoor bathroom was that you knew you had money. And you can really see how Ephesus lived. So when you read about the testimony of these historians, it's true. I was able to see some of the evidence of that. Now, Seneca talks about this. He critiques Romans' excess wine culture and banqueting as engines of moral collapse. Now, watch what he says. We drink to the point of vomiting and then vomit in order to drink again. Seneca's critique, Minor Revelations, satirical register. Now, why is this important? This is called symposium. Not the way the word symposium is used today, but back in the ancient world, it was basically banquets that they're all reclining. And I was able to learn about this in Laodicea because that's what it talks about there. I'll spit you out of my mouth. Neither one you called or, and that has to do with the geographical locations. Hierapolis, well, they have some thermals, thermal bath, and then you have the Nisli, which is where the letter of Colossians was written to Colosso, right? And then you have cold water there. Laodicea was smack in the middle between the Nisli, which is ancient Colossus, and also Hierapolis. And Laodicea was known for the very, very extravagant lifestyle. They were located geographically in one of the most important connecting roads of the ancient world. If you want to get to Ephesus, you got to go to Laodicea. Laodicea was a banking center of the ancient world, as well as black wool. Okay, but they had no water source. So they were bringing the water from Hierapolis, the warm one, and the cold one from the south. And they were known for the water distribution, very, very advanced for their time. So therefore, by the time it got to them, it had to have an influence of the condition of how the water was now. It's not necessarily cold or hot. It may be warm, but also it's connected with symposium. Symposium was banquets that took place in which they will entertain. When they say entertainment, if a patrician or a high-level elite in the Roman Empire would invite you to their house for a banquet, they are now your patron and you are the client. Now you go in there, he has to entertain you. What does that mean? Either to prostitution or games or music or whatever, entertainment. Okay, either male prostitutes, women prostitutes, and give you a banquet. Some of those people, by the way, they have to recline in order to do that, which shows their status. And what that means is when they want it, they were like gluttony. Okay, they will get to the point that they ate too much, but they want to keep going. So they will actually drink some kind of drink made up of wine. It'll be warm and will cause them to throw up in order for them to continue to drink and to do the crazy things that they were doing. This is also the significance of these verses, not only in the cultural law locally, but also the influence of Rome in their moral decay around the empire and its influences around the empire. Hopefully, this is making sense to you guys. Okay. All right. So, yeah, like Epstein. Exactly. Exactly like Epstein. Exactly like that. Okay. So, the Pliny the Elder talks about documents Rome's extensive wine trade network across the Mediterranean, the material basis for the wine imagery in Revelation 18. Rome both consumed and exported wine as a tool of cultural imperialism. And this is the reason why they made a decree to burn all the vineyards, because they were interfering. In Asia Minor, the wine was better than Rome. So the emperor says, okay, burn them all. So therefore, now only they can buy from Rome. It's quite interesting when you do the history and the story. So check this out. This is what I was talking to you about. Right? It says participation in imperial banquets and festivals, the Diepna, hosted by civic elites and emperor worshippers, signal loyalty to Rome. Refusing to attend or eat food sacrificed to the emperor carried economic and social consequences. So this is what we're told not to do. Do not eat meat sacrificed to idols, and do not go to these banquets. Revelation's food, wine imagery directly addresses the social pressure about this. David De Silva talks about this in this amazing book about honor, patronage, and kingship purity. I highly recommend that book for you guys to understand this better. Okay? Now let's talk about patronage, system, social science, interpretation of Rome. Let me ask you guys a question. I'm not the only person teaching this stuff, okay? Clearly, I'm not that special. I'm basically trying to tap into the cultural context of what we read in the New Testament. And there are a lot of people who paved the way with research, validated primary sources that helps us. But how many of you have never considered looking at the book of Revelation in this context to understand how it was perceived and applied in the time frame the letter was written? How many of you never consider that? Put yes or no. Gives me an idea, because I think once I understood that the Bible requires cultural context. It made it easy for me to live a lifestyle according to the Bible, because then I'm saying, okay, I know what that means. I understand what it's talking about. The principles are the same. For example, idolatry is idolatry, murder is murder, adultery is adultery throughout every generation in every culture. The difference is that God puts it in a format, in a particular way that other nations don't. For example, murder, idolatry, and adultery are basically a structure in a covenantal treaty with consequences of a apodictic formula, meaning that God says, don't do because I said so. That's not found in any other ancient Near Eastern culture. Okay, God prescribed moral behavior within the core of a covenantal relationship, and that's what I was trying to convey the message here in the Book of Revelation. If you're in a covenantal relationship with God, you have to maintain the principle that He established: loyalty to the covenant, no meat sacrifice to idols that constitute idolatry. Don't partake of the immorality, because that is actually disloyalty. If you commit, for example, homosexuality in Rome, if a man takes the passive role, then he's a homosexual. If a man takes the active role, then he is not. It's weird, you know. Like, for example, divorce in Imperial Rome, the man had the right to do so, but a woman who was married had to cover her head with a pala, not the toga, the pala, because the toga was used by women who were loose. Loose women use the toga, okay, or the wife of the emperor. But normally, regular women, honorable women, didn't wear that. So therefore, if a woman would uncover her head and take off her veil in public, that was a shameful act towards her husband that could give him grounds for divorce. So there's so many things culturally that we need to understand that unfortunately we don't think about, and we try to apply all those things to the modern world without its proper context. And that's why so many people think they take basic verses that the audience would have understood what it meant back then, and today they take them completely out of order and completely out of context, creating an oppressive type of lifestyle to God instead of a freedom serving the Lord. Okay, so let's talk about patronage system in the Greco-Roman world. All right, so Roma's the ultimate patron, the emperor. When you read Friesen and also De Silva talks about this, the Roman society operated through a hierarchical patron-clan relationship. It's called patrocinium. David De Silva quotes, he says, the emperor stood at the apex of an empire, wide patronage network, dispensing benefits. Okay, now this is important. Dispensing benefits, peace, trade access, legal protection. So if your city became neokoros, then that means you had peace, the peace of Rome. You had trade. That's why Ephesus had one of the best ports and harbors in the ancient world. It's actually man-made, okay? And they had legal protection. They were an imperial city. They were the keepers of a temple. Therefore, the emperor would actually look after them. They have beneficio, which is benefits, okay? That's why you need it, beneficia. Okay, so it says, cities receive beneficia, benefits from Rome. In return, the city, they owed honor and participation in imperial cult worship. This would have made a serious problem for the believers in Yeshua. So now, the people, the common people, the merchants, the elite, and the provincial governors, they will give loyalty and honor to the emperor, and in turn, the emperor will give them peace, trade, legal protection. Does that sound familiar to you? Now, because we accept Yeshua as our master, not the emperor, and we believe God is the one who put Yeshua and resurrected Yeshua, now we get the peace of God, shalom. Now we get what? We are part of the Commonwealth of Israel. We received an inheritance, thus, and we are sealed by His Spirit, and we received a legal protection. We are part of His kingdom. That's why He calls us our sons and daughter. He has given us the power to become the sons of God. Guys, that's adoption language. Anyone who understood Greco-Roman world would have known that anyone who comes through Yeshua, God will adopt. He becomes our patron. Yeshua becomes our benefactor. He becomes our mediator. And now we receive the peace of the Lord. Now we received value, honor. We received an inheritance. It makes perfect. The Bible now makes sense. God wants to bestow honor upon us. He doesn't want to defeat us. He wants to give us honor. So the theological problem in the first century. In the Jewish prophetic tradition, ultimate loyalty belongs to the Lord alone. Receiving beneficia from Rome or benefits of Rome and rendering honor to the emperor constitutes exactly the covenant betrayal or sana, prostitution, that the prophets condemned. So the economic dimension of this was very pivotal. He says, Friesen demonstrates that participation in imperial cult and require for guild membership and market access in Asian cities. Economic survival was intertwined with idolatrous loyalty. Have you ever heard of a book called Associations in the Ancient World? Let's see if I find it. Don't go anywhere. Associations. Associations in the Ancient World. Found the book. This book is a source book. It's actually primary sources, validating what I'm telling you. Okay, I highly recommend you get it. It's called Associations in the Greco-Roman World, a source book by Richard S. Askoff and Philip Harland. I highly recommend you get this book. Let me see if I can place it here so you guys can see it. Okay? Get this book. It's talk about all the associations and how they have to do it. Also, have you ever heard of the libelli? See, there's an inscription here, that one, and that inscription is a membership list of an association devoted to Zeus. Okay? And this one here, there's another one. This is another inscription. Anubis is relief in an honorific inscription set up by an association of banqueters in Thessalonica, meaning that if you belong to this particular association, you have to have meals in honor of Anubis. Okay? By the way, the Jews were exempt from being part of these things. Is this making sense to you? Now, this one right here, see if I find it, is by David E. Graves. Jesus Speaks to the Seven Churches. And it's a really cool one. And in one of my notes here, see if I find it, because it's only, this book is only about the seven churches. I read this whole thing just to teach about the seven churches of Revelation. When it talks about Livelli, hopefully I'll find it. I gotta hurry up, but I want to get it for you because I think it's important. So the way they did it was they were trying to there we go, right here. In page 61 of this book, it talks about Livelli. Livelli was a document. Let me read this to you. Libellus. What is that about? By the way, talk about the city of the Ephesians as Neokoros, temple keeper. And Libellus was this. The Livelli, a certificate of sacrifice, were documents instituted in the year 249 by the Emperor Decius to the year 251. Now, again, remember, this was added much later than the first century. But the premise and the principle is the same. This was to prove the loyalty to the emperor back in the year 249. Remember, they're believers in Yeshua in the year 249 too. So they had to, this was part of what the persecution would have looked like for them in that time frame. In the first century, associations was connected with all this stuff. Watch this. It says, to help unify the Roman Empire and return it to its former traditions, Origen noted that the political problem being experienced in his days was due to the increase of numbers of Christians. The Roman authorities required a libelli from Roman citizens to verify that they had offered a pagan god to the ancestor gods to demonstrate allegiance to Rome. As Potter points out, failure to sacrifice could result in exile, confiscation of property, prison, or even death. Nobbs describes the creation and relevance of libellus Potter explains it this way. He says, it shows the solidarity to all Romans behind their ancestral gods and sacrifices. Every household was obliged to appear on a fixed day, veiled and crowned, and submit a libellus, a certificate declaring participation in the sacrifice. The requirement to produce documentary witness to the act of sacrifice was noble. The obligation to retain a personal copy indicated that this proofs of religious piety had ongoing significance and implications for the civil identity of those concerned. So therefore, now you have something quite interesting. No, do you have the proof of vaccination? Do you get the vaccine? Oh, you didn't get it, so you're not loyal. You are going to be a pest to humanity. You're going to get everybody sick. And by the way, you're not part of society. You cannot work. You cannot eat. We don't want you here. Stay 6 feet away. You see, it's not the same, but it's the same. Does that make sense? It's the principle. So throughout the history, persecution take different forms, but it's still persecution. In this time frame, in the first 3 centuries, it was all about the Roman Empire and the loyalty and allegiance to it. That's what John is trying to deal with in the 7 churches of Revelation. It's about allegiance to God, not the emperor. Does this make sense to you? So therefore, Revelation counter narrative. Let's read here. It says, come out of her, my people. Revelation 8:4. The call is to exit the patronage network entirely. That's really what it means. Don't depend on the government to take care of you, even at economic cost, and render exclusive loyalty to God as true patrons. In other words, if you go out there and you try to say the government will take care of me, and then the government says, I'm not going to give you a check unless you worship the emperor, or you worship the president, or you worship the senator, or you do this and you do that, or you take this or you do that, you're depending on a patron other than God when he's the one who provides everything for you. Do you realize how significant this was in the 1st century? It was a battle for allegiance. How about the ideological problem? There are different problems here that we must examine. The theological problem, I'm sorry. In Jewish prophetic tradition, ultimate loyalty belongs to the Lord. I think I already read this before. Yeah, I already read that one. Let's move on. Come out of her, my people. Already read that one too. What is a prophetic warning to come out? We already read that in Isaiah 48:20. Go forth from Babylon, flee from Chaldea, declare with the shouts of joy, proclaim it. In other words, come out of the system means don't depend on it. Depend on God. That's really what it's talking about. I think I kind of make that clear. Let me move on. So coming out of my people now has a different kind of connotation than what we were told all along. It's talking about system of a government. Okay. How about the Imperial Cult and Revelation 7 churches? Concrete social setting in Asia Minor. Pergamum, the first city in Asia to receive a temple to Augustus, Neocoros. Revelation 2:13 calls it the place where Satan's throne is. That was the temple of Zeus, and the altar of it is today in Berlin in the museum, Berlin Museum. Ephesus, 3 times it became Neocoros, hosting 3 imperial temples. The city's economic was deeply integrated with imperial cult festivals and guild structures tied to idol worship. Now it makes sense why, when Paul went preaching about Yeshua, they started crying out, great is Diana, great is Diana, Artemis, because they were keepers of the temple. Their allegiance was to Rome. If it would have gone to the Roman emperor that they're accepting another king other than the emperor, the city would have lost all its privileges, its status, its business, its peace, and the Romans could have the right to destroy the city. Now you know why they were so adamant about getting rid of Paul? Smyrna hosted an imperial temple from 26 Common Era onward. Revelation 2:9 addresses those facing economic pressure from non-participation in civil religious life. It's a lot different than it is today. Revelation 2, verse 14 and 15, warns against the teachings of Balaam and the Nicolaitans, who apparently encourage eating food sacrificed to idols and participation in practice John labels as porneia, which is idolatry, which is lack of allegiance. This represents a practical form of drinking the wine, accommodating the imperial cult, participating to maintain socioeconomic standing. It's like saying, hey, let's go back to Easter service. It's okay. Isn't that what the church does? Or let's go to Mardi Gras. Let's go to something that goes against the principles of the Torah. Meat sacrificed to idols. The BDAC talks about this. That Greek word right here is in the Roman context. Such meat was distributed at public festivals, guild banquets, and imperial celebrations. Refusal meant social and economic marginalization. The exact pressure Revelation communities face. So as you can see, there's a lot that we need to learn that unfortunately we're not really tapping into because we're not in tune with the culture of the time. And that is true from everything else, by the way. Let's read this. The Lamb versus the Beast. That's really the contrast. Revelation's counter-imperial claim. Revelation presents a stark binary. The Lamb, who was slain versus the Beast, who embodies imperial power. The wine, or her immorality and moral passion, is the beast system chief's tool of seduction. The contrast between Babylon's cup, Revelation 17:4, and the Lamb's invitation to the marriage supper, Revelation 19:9, is structurally central in the book rhetoric. That's what Cortes says in his commentary of the book of Revelation. So now, Revelation 17:4. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet clothing, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. And she held in her hand a golden cup filled with the detestable things of the unclean things of her sexual immorality. It's talking about not only Rome, but also Babylon, but also Egypt, but also the Greeks, every nation that has done things that are not proper according to the context of the Bible. So again, everything that we're reading has to do with the influence of the world through seduction. That's why drinking is connected here, because people lose a moral fiber. Porneia, which is betrayal in this sense, betrayal to a covenantal relationship, just like idolatry, just like adultery. Those things are the same principle. So why is this important to understand? Because if we do not consider understanding cultural backgrounds, sometimes we're going to revert back to our understanding of the text from a Western mentality in the Western world. We keep saying, "Come out of come out of Babylon, my people," but in reality, we're still interpreting the Bible the way that it was interpreted by the Romans and by the Catholics, and later on by denominationalism by the Protestants. I think we need to move a little closer to the first century and then go beyond to the time of Moses and then go a little earlier to the time of Abraham. And then we're able to understand the Bible a little bit better. So with that being said, let me go to 2 more slides because I have to go. But I want to give you a rundown of these metaphors and the way that is used here in the book of Revelation. In the Greek text, it talks about the word wine. So I'm going to quote from the BDAG and then the symbolism of what it means in the book of Revelation, okay? So consider that when you're studying this, the connections of these words, how they're used, and what they represent in a cultural background of the first century. Wine, symbolic meaning in Revelation, is seductive imperial influence and ideology. Themos, which is intense passion or fury, is burning, consuming drive of imperial power. Sexual immorality, which is porneia, is used in a covenantal betrayal, idolatrous allegiance to Rome, rejecting the covenant of God through Yeshua to submit to the Roman emperor and all that they have to give you. Ethne, here means nation or peoples, is basically the global participants in the imperial system. Abominational idol is the imperial cult objects, like the images of the imperial cult of the emperor. is detestable idolatry. Strenos, which is excessive luxury, is Rome's decadent wealth that corrupts through abundance, just like in the United States. It's happened in the United States. Or neon, which means the lamb. Aquí has been presented as the true patron, Messiah, contrasted with a beast. What is it that Messiah gives us compared to what the emperor does? And this is why he's using connections with the Old Testament in regards to Jeremiah 51:7, Isaiah 23:17, the book of Nahum 3:4, Jeremiah 51:45, verse 45, and Isaiah 48, verse 20. Is giving you a rundown, a historical account of how those things are still the same. Remember that in the story of Nebuchadnezzar, he wanted to make 3 people bow down to the image of an idol, and they refuse. That's imperial worship. It's the same thing. And then you have Daniel, who refused to eat meat sacrificed to idols. We see the same thing. And those people survive. And they renounce Nebuchadnezzar as their patron, and they believe God would help them and protect them. And that's the message today. Whom are you going to serve? The gods of this world, what the world can provide for you, what God can provide for you. And this is the reason why in ministry, I only believe that God will supply for our needs. He does it because we need to be loyal to him. If we are loyal to the Lord, he will provide for our needs. He will stand up for us. He will never let us be ashamed. He would always be our shield and our protector. And he will use you, the body of Messiah, to continue to provide so the kingdom can move forward. So please, I highly recommend that you continue research and study on this subject matter from a cultural background as a foundation and on a base of your studies. And then from there, you can take freedoms to see how it applies to you today. But if we do not recognize the original intent of the writer to the audience, the location of the audience, the religion of the audience, and the geography and also the culture of the audience, we will find ourselves hard-pressed to understand how those things are similar but yet different, just because we live in a different area and time frame where the principles are the same. Idolatry is still the same. Adultery is still the same. Getting drunk and losing your moral fiber is still the same. But the consequences are a little different here than they were back there. But again, the motif is the same. If we understand those things, then we will be able to identify prophetically and in the eschatological perspective the signs of the end, the signs of the beginning of the Great Tribulation, and how those things will occur. And I pray this teaching is edifying to you. If these teachings are a blessing to you, consider joining wisdomintorah.com and support our ministry so we can continue to do these teachings every week, and that we're able to continue to share with other people the goodness of God and how he is faithful and true. And he will forever be our patron, whom he sent his son Yeshua so that we would have access to all the goodness of the King and his righteousness. Shalom to every single one of you. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this YouTube channel so others will also be blessed. Take care. Shalom.